Здравствуйте, drugs. My name is Dasha Makienko, and today it is the one you've all been waiting for. This real Russian will review the Grisha Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. Before we get into it, Христос воскрес! It was Russian Easter this last Sunday. I have some leftover Pascha and kulich, and if I could, I would share it with every single last one of you. I hit 500 subs recently, and I am in shock and awe because I don't understand how over 500 of you would take time out of your very busy day to sit down and watch my dumbass. So thank you. So, Shadow and Bone has been everywhere recently due to television show coming out, and so I thought it'd be a good time to review on channel. Shadow and Bone is the first book in the Grisha Trilogy, and I will be reviewing the whole trilogy. And so the Grisha Trilogy is about orphan girl Alina, and she discovers that she has the powers that her country has been looking for all along. And so, as usual, first part will have non-spoiler review, so that if you want me to stop with all this, you may get your wish. And of course, timestamps will be down below, all that nonsense. And then the second part, the fun part, is where I delve into the Russian elements of the Grishaverse, specifically focusing on the Grisha Trilogy. And we're going to discuss it. I even looked up interviews with Leigh Bardugo. I tried hard for you guys. I really did. It's a mess. So before I babble on too long, let's get into the review. Alright, so you guys know the drill by now. I structure my reviews by the CAWPILE method. I will leave the video by G from BOOKROAST'S explaining it down below. Basically just a way to rate books, but I also use it to structure my reviews. Additionally, quick plug, me and a couple friends, Ray from Bookmark Chronicles and Robin from Robin Reads, have a live show for the entirety of the Grishaverse. So if you would like to hear a 2-hour Mal hate session, you're welcome to go and rewatch the live show. We'll leave the link down below, as well as Robin and Ray's channels. So as I said, we're doing CAWPILE, so we're gonna start with characters, and oh my god, there's already so many issues there. Our main character, Alina, is something else. I think this girl had like bucket loads of potential. I think that Leigh Bardugo had the start of something great with her character, because I felt like she was really raw in a way that I don't see in a lot of young adult heroines. She was really kind of impulsive and really stubborn and had a bit of a temper, but I found that kind of endearing. She wasn't always perfect, and she knew that. But I also found her really fucking annoying. Actually, I found a lot of the characters in this series annoying. Alina had this way of like talking about other girls that was just so draining, because all she would focus on was how these other women look, and she would constantly go on about how gorgeous Zoya is, how gorgeous Zhenya is, and it just got to the point where it's just like, okay, but move on. I read these books on Scribd, so I can go back and see my highlights and my notes, and the amount of times I complained about her using the word gorgeous is like beyond anything I could count. It's just completely obscene. That word was used way too much, and it just made, like, I don't know. Alina had this fixation on other women that was just so weird to like read about, and I just really didn't like it. And again, because Alina had so much potential, it was really hard to watch her be such a dumb bitch. Mal, on the other hand, I just didn't like. Straight up, I thought he was super whiny. I thought that he didn't really do things that always made sense with his character. They just really helped to serve the plot. And I know there are a lot of people that love the two of them together in their story, and I kind of get it, but at the same time, I'm like, if you really want us to believe that he is the right love interest for her, then you gotta make him somewhat likable, because I was not liking that at all. And then the Darkling, which is like the big debate at the moment, because Ben Barnes is hot, but the Darkling is bad. Listen, I don't hate him that much as a character, because I think that Leigh Bardugo actually did a really good job writing him. She specifically said that her goal with the Darkling was to create a villain that was not pure evil, that was not like ugly and mustache twirling and like super obviously a villain. She wanted to create a villain that was someone that had possibly good intentions and that had a just goal. and that made it a little bit harder to view them as the villain. And then everybody just like took him and ran on opposite sides, either hot, sexy, bad guy that's genocidal, or he's just a bad, terrible person, and you're a bad, terrible person for liking him at all. And it's like, the whole point of him is that there is a bit of a middle ground. And I'm not saying this because he deserves to be redeemed. I'm just saying the whole point of how he was written was to create a morally gray character. And for a group of people that claim to love morally gray characters, BookTube and BookTwitter are horrific at recognizing them. So I thought the Darkling was actually a super well executed character. I didn't mind him throughout the series in terms of his characterization. Obviously the things he did bothered me, but like that's the point. I thought in terms of how he was written, super well done. I didn't mind it. When it comes to chemistry between characters, I really didn't feel it. I think that Alina would have been better served without any kind of like love interest plot. And I know that it's young adult fantasy and it kind of has to, you know, it sells, people love ships and all this kind of nonsense. But I think Alina truly was hindered by her feelings towards different men in the series. I think that she was someone that really, kind of like Katniss from the Hunger Games, could have just ended up alone, and I think she would have deserved it, and I think it would have suited her. The rest of the characters, there's not much to say. There are some kind of like stereotypical characters and some kind of the same character archetypes we see over and over again, but I have really nothing to complain about when it comes to the characters because the focus is so heavily on our main characters that it doesn't really matter. Also, we stand Nikolai in this house. He's the saving grace of this entire literary universe. Next, the writing. So I thought the writing was very, very middle of the road in the series. Like, I think it reads like what it is, a 2012 young adult fantasy, honestly. Some parts were extremely like fan fiction-y, like all the parts of Darklina and Malina, like all of the kind of relationshipy parts were somewhat painful to read, I'm not gonna lie. And like I said, the amount of times that Leigh Bardugo uses the word gorgeous makes me want to puke. But at the same time, there's a lot of quotable moments, and Leigh Bardugo does have, she sometimes has these moments that make you go, oh, that was kind of nice, oh, that was quotable. And I'm talking beyond the, you and me are gonna change the world. If that's all you focus on, you guys need to read this more carefully. There's some really, really good stuff in here. There's some really good quotable lines, but I think in terms of just the general quality of her writing, you can really tell that she progressed from Shadow and Bone to Six of Crows. Like there's a big jump in quality of writing, and you can tell that this was where she was starting to kind of hone her craft a little bit. I want to quickly touch on the plots of the 3 books and the intrigue, because when it comes to Shadow and Bone and Ruin and Rising, I actually didn't mind like the pacing and the plot. I thought that it all somewhat made sense. There were some parts of it that I was just kind of hooked and reading, and I didn't really care about reading it super critically. I was kind of enjoying myself because it was a good story. But Siege and Storm, can we talk about how whack that book is? You start off and literally on like the 20th page, there's this big fucking action scene. And then you're dropped in the middle of this plot that wasn't even like hinted at in Shadow and Bone. And you're sitting there and you're like, this feels very convenient. This feels extremely convenient because there's a certain element at the beginning of Siege and Storm that was kind of a continuation from an element in Shadow and Bone, but it was never mentioned. And I was sitting here and I was like, it seems like this was pulled out of thin fucking air to continue the series, and I'm not here for it. And then what happened between like that part, which was still only like 75 pages in, and the end of the book, couldn't tell you. What happened in the middle? I don't know. All I remember is like the beginning and the end. And the end, I didn't mind. The beginning was a lot. Everything that happened in the middle, couldn't tell you. And I think there was just a lot of pacing issues with that book, and the plot was just all over the place. And I noticed that even in her King of Scars duology, pacing and plot conveniences, Leigh Bardugo just has a bag she can pull him out of for days, and it gets really old to read, not gonna lie. And again, kind of building off that to head into the logic section, which usually refers to literal logic, world building, or magic systems. When it comes to literal logic, the amount of times that something was supposed to work a certain way, and then all of a sudden, oh my god, this character can do this thing that we didn't know we could do. I'm like, this is so fucking obvious that you wrote yourself into a corner and you could not write yourself out of it without pulling one of the tricks out of your bag, and it was clear as day. However, when it comes to the actual world building and magic system, I personally don't have a lot of complaints. I feel like the magic system is really interesting. I like that it is very, very well explained in the series, and I actually like how Leigh Bardugo gave it kind of like a molecular physics almost element. Like there is a scientific explanation almost for how things happen. And I think that that was really, really smart to give it some kind of basis, and it really kind of grounds it into a logical reality that we understand when we're reading it. So it's not just this abstract, whoo, magic. It's something real. It's called the small science, and I think that's a really, really cool touch. I also think that the world building was great. I think that the way that Leigh Bardugo made it so that every single country in this world viewed Grisha differently was really smart. I think that she had all their cultures really well represented. I like that she included, you know, military nonsense and political nonsense, and I think it really worked quite well. The problem was it was all derailed by Alina and her tales of woe over the two men in her life. But there was just some really good foundations for all this like political, religious, military intrigue and all this like societal stuff that was happening at the same time, and I wish we had more of that, honestly. And so finally we had some like inklings of themes of religion and kind of, you know, typical young adult fantasy stuff like finding your place in the world and found family and carving out your own path and all this kind of stuff. And it was done in a pretty good way. I can't really complain. And again, the kind of gray morality that we also saw with the Darkling, I would say has a pretty big role in this, and again, was pretty well executed. Overall, I think that this series is fine for what it is, and what it is a 2012 young adult fantasy series, and that's pretty much it. Like, if you want a pretty quick read that has a unique magic system and like just a really fast pace, it could be for you, and I'm not going to discourage you from reading it. It was just something. It was a lot. So I gave Shadow and Bone 3 stars, I gave Siege and Storm 2.5 stars, and I gave Ruin and Rising 3 stars. Alright, so now we're gonna get to the part I know y'all have been waiting for. I'm about to pick the series apart for its Russian elements. Everyone obviously knows it's inspired by like Tsarist 18th, 19th century Russia. You can even see it like really vividly in the TV show. I'm gonna preface this whole section by saying that this is my opinion. I am Russian, so I feel somewhat qualified to give my opinion on this, but if you disagree, that's fine. I would love to know why in the comments. I'm open to discussion, but this is where I stand after having read the entire Grishaverse, read a ton of interviews with Leigh Bardugo, and just kind of like sitting on it for a while because I read these books in January. This is where I stand. I saw an article the other day that claimed that Shadow and Bone was cultural appropriation. It was written by another Russian. And while I think that that term is really, really strong for what this is, because Leigh Bardugo herself is of like Russian Jewish descent, and I think also like Israeli Jewish descent, it's almost what it feels like. It feels like almost like a disrespect. And let me elaborate. Listen, the world building in the Grisha Trilogy, when it comes to the Russian elements, is just kind of lazy. Like the Grisha magic system, super cool. The other countries and cities like Ketterdam, fantastic, I love it. The whole of Ravka and its culture was lifted almost one for one, but the tweaks that she chose to make no damn sense. I'm not saying that fantasy that is clearly inspired by another culture has to, quote, make sense because it is fantasy. But what I am saying is that when you borrow something from another culture, the least you can do is make sure that the elements that are clearly borrowed and referenced are at least well researched and kind of true to what it is. I'm not saying your magic system has to be from Russia. I'm not saying the geography has to be identical to Russia. Like, I'm not saying these fantastical elements have to make sense, but when you're making me believe that this culture is based off an existing one, it feels very disrespectful when you do some things that are just blatantly not present in the original culture. It just feels kind of lazy and half-baked. And a lot of this stuff is super petty, and I will admit that. But look, if you're gonna sit here and tell me that your novels are inspired by Russia, I'm gonna sit here and ream you out for being on the fence about how fucking Russian it is, because it's my channel, and because I think it's fun, and because I will also praise you for the things you did right, but I love being petty. So let's get into the kind of questionable things first. So I talked about this in my last Real Russian reviews, but the naming system is so fucking whack. In Russia, names are gendered. So Alina Starkov would not be a real name. She would be Alina Starkova. Zoya Nazalensky would not be a thing. She would be Zoya Nazalenskaya. Alexander Morozova would be Alexander Morozov. Do you kind of catch my drift? And look, I read Leigh Bardugo's website. I know she said it was a conscious decision to not do the whole naming system thing as real Russians do it. But to me, something as personal as a name and something so deeply entrenched in Russian culture, because names are very, very special to Russians. They take it seriously. They name them after angels and saints, and they celebrate name days. And it's just like, there's a big focus on names. It's a really important part of Russian culture. It feels kind of like an affront. It feels like she just pick and chose the parts that were like aesthetic, that she liked from Russian culture, and then took the parts that were actually important, like names, and said, I can mess around with this. It's my world. I can do what I want. I just personally didn't really like that. Again, petty, maybe. I didn't like that. Another thing that bothered me was kvass. So kvass in the Grishaverse is an alcoholic drink that the soldiers drink out of flasks and get fucking hammered on. Kvass is a real drink. It is a kind of fermented, I've heard it described as like bread beer. I still don't really know what goes in it. I hate it. I never drink it at family gatherings or Russian gatherings. I think it's vile, but it's not alcoholic. It's more akin to like kombucha than it is akin to any kind of beer or whiskey. And while initially I thought it was maybe because Leigh Bardugo wanted to avoid, I don't know, maybe she wanted to avoid vodka because of stereotypes, even though she didn't really go that far to avoid stereotyping Russians in her book anyways, in my opinion. I later found out that she did not want to use the word vodka because it would place the reader too much in our time. To which I thought, what? Vodka is not a modern invention. Vodka has been around for a very long time. She has no problem using the word tsar, which was used until 1917. She has no problem even using the explicit Russian word banya, which is the big, it's kind of like a, I don't want to call it the equivalent of a spa, but people used to have like a town banya where they would go wash up like once a week, and it'd be like a sauna, and you could like scrub yourself and beat yourself with the birch branches and all this stuff, right? She used the word banya in its proper context in Shadow and Bone, and there are still tons of operational banyas in Russia. I actually wish they had them everywhere because they're fantastic. It's so much fun. But the point is, she has no problem using certain words that still place us within our time, but vodka is too topical. I don't understand. I don't get it. Especially because kvass, again, kvass is a real drink. It exists in our world. If you go to any kind of Eastern European market, you will find kvass. If you go to any Russian gathering, you will find kvass. Everyone drinks it. It is super popular to this day. So why does that not place us in our time and world and place, but vodka does? I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but it feels kind of like a very Americanized lens on Russian culture. It's like, oh, I'm not going to use vodka because we know this and we associate it with Russia, but I'm going to use this Russian word that American people wouldn't know, so it's okay. And I'm gonna make it something it's not. I think what it comes down to is that she wanted it to be inspired by Tsarist Russia, but not make it authentic for whatever reason, and it just felt sloppy, in my opinion. When you create something that evokes such strong association and imagery, but then you skirt responsibility with really important things like people's names, it just doesn't work. There's a disconnect there. You can't say, oh, I'm gonna take so many elements and aesthetics from this culture, but I'm gonna completely fuck you all up when it comes to your language and your names. Doesn't work like that, sis. It's not all bad. Let me get into some of the kind of little things that I liked, little Russian touches that I liked. Like I mentioned earlier, the inclusion of like the banyas I thought was really, really fun because It's such a unique cultural experience if you've ever been to like a Russian bath. It is not like anything you will ever see. I think the closest thing would be, I think it's Finnish baths. But this is not a relaxing spa experience. It's a whole ordeal, but you feel so good when you come out of it. And just like little touches like that, or she included obviously like samovars, pickled beets, herring, like all of these kind of very traditional Russian elements that was just kind of very familiar for me to read. As much as I was annoyed at how she portrayed Russian culture a little bit, I really did feel comfortable sinking into a world that I did know. I grew up with my grandma's samovar, you know, brewing a little tea. I grew up eating pickled beets. I still love pickled beets. I grew up hating herring. I still hate herring. But it's those little touches that make it feel a little bit more real, I will admit. Another thing I really liked is that the capital of Ravka, or Salta, is very clearly inspired by St. Petersburg, and I actually really enjoyed it. It felt like she got the atmosphere very right. So we have obviously the Grand Palace, which is supposed to be kind of the Hermitage, but you know, not. And then the actual city of Salta itself has these canals, and St. Petersburg has lovely canals, and she just got like the vibe of the whole city down really well, and like I understood what she was going for, what she was invoking, and I kind of liked it, I will say. And like if you've ever seen pictures of the Hermitage, or if you've been inside, it is this really extravagant, over the top, just out of the fucking, like balls to the wall, crazy, rich, luscious, almost like Versailles type Rococo building. Like it is decorated to the fucking nines, it makes no sense, and it is beautiful. And that's kind of what she was clearly going for. And I remember there's scenes where Alina is walking through the Grand Palace for the first time, and even the little palace, and she's like, you guys have all this stuff and people are dying on the streets. And I'm like, you understand it. I mean, it's pretty accurate. That's how the October Revolution happened, amongst other reasons. But yes, I really liked the atmosphere, like when it came to that. Another detail I appreciated was that Leigh Bardugo included liturgical Ravkan. So if you go to any Russian Orthodox church, there will be old Russian inscriptions on like the icons and like on the church, like on the above the altar. Old Russian is still very much used in religious iconography in Russian Orthodox Church, and I like that she kind of made that parallel between the churches of Ravka and the Eastern Orthodox Church. I think that that was kind of a really nice touch. To me, that showed that there was a little bit of effort put in. That sounds really mean. Another thing I liked, it's kind of small, but the apparat was supposed to be kind of a Rasputin-like figure, and if you know anything about Rasputin, he was an advisor to the royal family. He had this like big lore and legend around him, but really he was like a religious nut who kind of lurked in the shadows and kind of pulled at strings like a puppet master. So I did really like that she kind of included that type of character and gave him a lot of screen time. I think that the apparat was actually a pretty interesting character throughout the books. And I think that she really built that character up well, and I would not be surprised if she took like a lot of inspiration from Rasputin, but even if she didn't, the character archetype was there, and I really enjoyed reading him. And finally, I mean, the saints, the whole religion of worshiping saints. So being raised Russian, we took saints extremely seriously. A lot of people, most people are named after a specific saint. There are saints' days that are still celebrated. Their saint name days are celebrated, and it's kind of a very big culture. When you go to a Russian Orthodox church, you see a lot of the apostles on the walls, but you also see a lot of saints, and a lot of the icons are of saints alongside Jesus and Mary. So it's kind of cool to see that she took like a little part of that and made it into their religion, so it wasn't a one-for-one copy. I think that does lend itself well to kind of the fantastical element of the world. She wasn't trying to go for like a one-for-one copy, as we know, so I think in terms of creating a religion that still felt very true to Russia, but not completely ridiculous, I think she did a very good job in finding that balance. So like I said, like there's some good stuff in there. I found that when I saw those Russian elements I recognized, I really connected to them, and I thought it was great. But there's a lot of things I didn't like. It felt like co-opting the aesthetic of Tsarist Russia, and it's not it didn't come across as successful to me. But as I said, Leigh Bardugo is the daughter of Russian Jewish immigrants, so I cannot discount her relationship to the culture. I cannot discount how she feels towards it, and if she wants to use certain parts of it, she clearly at least has a bit of the background that I feel is necessary. I just didn't quite like what she did with it. So I stand kind of in the camp that I'm not sure it was a very successful representation of the culture. It seemed, like I said, like the aesthetics were borrowed more heavily than some of the cultural things. But again, I'm a very petty person. These are the things that stuck out to me the most, and overall me not liking the books a lot probably had a hand in me not necessarily liking how certain things are represented. So take what I say with a grain of salt. This is just for fun and slightly educational purposes. If you have read these books and you have, found certain things that you want to discuss, feel free to talk to me in the comments. I would love to discuss these further with you. Don't forget to check out our live show. It's linked. We go in depth about the actual books, as well as Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom and King of Scars and Rule of Wolves and our predictions for the show and all that kind of stuff. So it was a good time. I hope you would come back and watch it. Other than that, my social media is linked down below. You guys can always come talk to me there. And that is it for me today. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.